Ever wondered why we have two sexes? Why not one, three, or even more? This question takes us back to the very origins of life on Earth, where the only form of reproduction was asexual. A single organism would clone itself, creating an exact copy. But while asexual reproduction was efficient, it had a significant drawback: lack of diversity. Picture a world where all organisms are identical copies of each other. Any disease or environmental change that affects one, affects all. This lack of diversity was a ticking time bomb, threatening the survival of entire species. But as we know, life on Earth is incredibly resilient and adaptable, and it found a solution: sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction introduced a new method of creating offspring, a method that involved two parents instead of one. The offspring produced were no longer identical clones, but unique combinations of their parents' genetic material. This led to a boom in diversity, creating a myriad of life forms, each equipped to handle different challenges. But here's the catch: sexual reproduction required two different types of reproductive cells, or gametes. One type, the larger and more resource-intensive, we now call the egg. The other, smaller and more numerous, we refer to as sperm. And thus, the stage was set for the evolution of two distinct sexes. The emergence of two sexes, however, was not a smooth transition. It took millions of years of evolution, shaped by environmental pressures, genetic mutations, and chance. The journey was fraught with challenges and setbacks, but the end result was a system that has stood the test of time. So while it might seem strange that we have two sexes instead of one, three, or more, it's important to remember that this is the result of countless generations of evolution. It's a system that has proven to be incredibly successful, promoting diversity and resilience in the face of adversity. So, the evolution from asexual to sexual reproduction was a game changer. But how did we evolve into the two sexes we are familiar with today? The evolution of two sexes is a tale of survival and adaptation. This story begins with simple asexual organisms that reproduced by copying their own genetic material and splitting in two. This method was efficient, but it had a significant drawback. It didn't allow for much genetic diversity. Over time, however, organisms began to experiment with a new way of reproduction. Instead of simply cloning themselves, they began to swap genetic material with each other, a process we now call sexual reproduction. This was a game changer in the world of evolution. Suddenly, instead of producing identical offspring, organisms were creating unique combinations of genes in each new generation. This increased genetic diversity gave life on Earth a new tool to adapt to changing environments and resist disease. But how did we get from these early experiments in sexual reproduction to the two distinct sexes we see today? Well, it all comes down to gametes, the cells used in sexual reproduction. Initially, these gametes were likely identical, but over time they began to diverge. Some organisms started producing large, nutrient-rich gametes that were costly to make but gave offspring a head start in life. We now call these eggs. Other organisms took a different approach, creating small, mobile gametes that were cheap to produce and could travel to find eggs. These are what we now call sperm. This divergence in gamete size led to the emergence of two distinct strategies for reproduction, and with them, the two sexes. Organisms that produced eggs became what we now call females, and those that produced sperm became males. Each sex had its own advantages and challenges, and this diversity in reproductive strategies allowed life to flourish in a wide variety of environments and conditions. In terms of survival and adaptation, having two sexes allowed for a greater mixing of genes, which increased the chances of beneficial traits being passed on to future generations. This, in turn, improved the survival rates of species and allowed for more complex forms of life to evolve. These two distinct forms of biological entities, male and female, set the stage for a complex dance of evolution. But how does nature decide who becomes male and who becomes female? That's the question that's had scientists scratching their heads for centuries. The answer, it turns out, is as varied as the tapestry of life itself. Let's start with reptiles. Many species, like certain turtles and crocodiles, don't have sex chromosomes at all. Instead, they employ a fascinating method known as temperature-dependent sex determination. The temperature of the egg's environment during a critical period of embryonic development determines whether the offspring will be male or female. Cooler temperatures tend to produce males, while warmer conditions favor females. It's an elegant system, perfectly adapted to an unpredictable world. But what about mammals, including us humans? Well, we use a different system altogether, one based on genetics. In most mammals, there are two sex chromosomes, X and Y. If an embryo inherits two X chromosomes, it develops into a female, but if it gets an X from its mother and a Y from its father, it becomes a male. It's the presence or absence of the Y chromosome, and specifically a gene on the Y chromosome called SRY, that triggers the development of male characteristics. This genetic determination of sex is not restricted to mammals alone. Birds, for example, also have sex chromosomes. But interestingly, it's the female bird that has two different sex chromosomes and the male that has two of the same. Thus, the mechanisms of sex determination have evolved in different ways in different species, shaped by the unique pressures and opportunities of their environments. Some species even switch from one system to another under certain conditions, a phenomenon known as environmental sex determination. In conclusion, there's no one-size-fits-all answer to how sex is determined. It's a complex interplay of genetics and environment, shaped by the relentless forces of evolution. So the evolution of sex determination systems is as diverse as life itself. Did you know that the evolution of sexes has been described as an evolutionary arms race? Yes, it's an intriguing concept, but not as violent as it sounds. It is actually a metaphor used to describe the continuous adaptation and counter-adaptation that occurs between the two sexes. It's a game of one-upmanship, where each sex is trying to gain an advantage over the other. So how does this work? Well, let's dive into the concept of sexual selection, a crucial aspect of this evolutionary arms race. Sexual selection, first proposed by Charles Darwin, is a form of natural selection where individuals compete for mates. It's this competition that drives the evolution of sexes, shaping them over generations. Imagine a group of males vying for the attention of females. The males may develop certain traits, perhaps a brighter color, a larger size, or a unique song, anything that makes them stand out to females. This is known as male competition. But it's not just about flashy displays. Sometimes it's about sheer persistence or even brute strength. On the flip side, we have what's known as female choice. Females often choose their mates based on certain desirable traits. It could be the male's ability to provide food, his territory, or even his physical attributes. Over time, these chosen traits become more common in the population, shaping the species' evolution. However, it's not always a straightforward process. Sometimes what's beneficial for one sex may not be for the other. For instance, a male peacock's bright feathers may attract females, but they also attract predators. This tension between the sexes creates a dynamic and complex evolutionary landscape. So what's the result of this arms race? Well, it leads to an incredible diversity of life, with each species exhibiting a unique blend of traits shaped by countless generations of sexual selection. It's a testament to the power of evolution and the intricate dance between the sexes. So the evolution of sexes is a never-ending race, with each sex trying to outdo the other. The existence of two sexes is one of nature's most fascinating stories. We've journeyed through eons of time, unraveling the evolutionary tale of sexual reproduction. Let's take a moment to recap the intriguing narrative we've been exploring. Our story began with a simple world of asexual organisms. These life forms duplicated themselves, creating identical offspring. It was a simple, straightforward process. But nature, in its relentless quest for diversity and adaptability, favored a more complex method of reproduction. Thus, we saw the emergence of two sexes, a phenomenon known as anisogamy. This was a turning point in evolution, introducing a whole new dynamic to the game of life. Suddenly, organisms were not just surviving, they were interacting, competing, and cooperating in new and complex ways. This development led to a greater genetic diversity, providing a broader palette for natural selection to paint its masterpieces. From there, we delved into the intricate mechanisms of sex determination systems, from the simplicity of environmental sex determination, where temperature or other factors decide an organism's sex, to the complexity of genetic sex determination, where chromosomes hold the key. It's a fascinatingly diverse world where sex isn't always a binary, but a spectrum, reflecting the myriad ways life has evolved. Finally, we considered the evolutionary arms race, where sexual selection plays a pivotal role. Males and females are locked in a perpetual dance, each influencing the other's traits and behaviors. It's a dynamic process, a dance of evolution that shapes species in astonishing ways. And so we find ourselves at the end of this evolutionary tale, with a newfound appreciation for the intricacies of sexual reproduction. It's a story of survival, adaptation, and the relentless drive for diversity. It's a story that continues to unfold, with every new generation adding a fresh chapter. Next time you ponder about why we have two sexes, remember, it's all about survival, adaptation, and the relentless drive for diversity.